So about a week ago now, I got into a bit of a Twitter feud. Now, normally I avoid Twitter feuds like the plague, and actually I didn't intend to get in this one. Paul Gia had tweeted out some sort of vaguely controversial tweet. I guess it was intended to be provocative about utility, and I don't remember the exact details of the tweet, but it was interesting because the reason why it turned into a feud is Paul's pretty cool. Even on Twitter, you can get into a real conversation with Paul. But if he has tweeted something, he has got an army of sycophants. And if he takes issue with you, forget it. Because 4 or 5 of them will get in your face for no particularly good reason. I'm really convinced it's just because they saw Paul doing it. So they think, oh, it's I gotta join in this. I swear, when Paul, there was about 3 weeks ago or a month ago, Paul got upset at one of my videos and we started discussing it on Twitter. And after that, that was the only video where a whole bunch of people appeared, about 5 people who never watch my videos. All of a sudden, they're arguing with me in the comment section. I'm like, where'd you clowns come from? They see Paul doing something and they do like Paul. I swear it's really that embarrassing because it's almost exactly what happened. So he tweeted out something intended to be provocative. Whether he actually thinks it's true or not, I'm not sure, because it was a little bit sketchy. The idea being, I don't remember the details of exactly what he tweeted, but something like basically he was an anti-theist position that there cannot be utility to religion if the core beliefs are not true. That wasn't exactly what he tweeted, but that was the idea behind it. So I tweeted something in response, not forgetting where I was. I was on Twitter, and I was if you're tweeting on Paul's timeline, you're kind of in enemy territory. Not because Paul himself you can have a conversation with, but like I said, there are 4 or 5 sycophants who are going to jump and then they're going to be irritating, obnoxious, douchebag atheists, and they're going to get in your face immediately, and that's what happened. So I tweeted something along the lines of, utility is a perfect reason to keep any and all ideas, which I think is totally true. I think he said something like, utility is not a good enough reason to adopt false ideas. Something like that. Actually, I think that's basically the idea of what he said. I said utility is a perfectly good reason to adopt any and all ideas. And then I went on to say something a bit sketchier, more provocative, intended to start a conversation. Something along the lines of, utility is actually a barometer. If something is useful, how can something be truly useful? Is it not in some ways true? Now, I was intended to start a conversation. What I didn't realize, now there are a lot of atheists and secular people who listen to my videos, but for the most part they're the higher brow, well-educated, they know what they're talking about, atheists and secular people. They aren't the dumbos who follow whatever Paul tweets, because some of those people are just like, you can't even imagine. They start talking about things like metaphorical truths, and you realize 3 tweets in that they have no idea what they're talking about. They start condemning the idea of metaphorical truths. They start condemning, they make snide little comments, well, that's very Peterson-esque, and they have no idea what they're talking about. They haven't done, step 1 of investigating what was actually going on with the Peterson phenomenon, what was Brett Weinstein talking about with metaphorical truths. And, it was clear to me as I was engaging with a bunch of different people on the timeline. First of all, what was interesting is I had secular people, 2 atheists on my side. So that will happen. If you are talking about metaphorical truths and the secular utility of religion, you will have atheists and secular people and agnostics who will join your side. Why? Because the things you're talking about are pretty obvious. Once you start getting educated about comparative religion, once you start actually investigating Jordan Peterson instead of casting aspersions from the sideline, oh, he's an idiot, he's a right-winger. He's all the critiques of him are usually rooted in ignorance. The people doing the critiquing haven't bothered to watch any, his debate with Sam Harris. I mean, if you watch his debate with Sam Harris, how you can not come away from that debate with anything but respect for Jordan Peterson and his ideas and what he's trying to get across, I have no idea. Because that's probably the most prominent intellectual in the atheist community. Not only did he hold his own with him easily, but he kind of won that debate pretty easily along the things that he pushes out about religion. Now, usually the criticism against him are rooted in ignorance. They're rooted in his stance on things like trans rights and things like that, which I don't really know anything about. Never bothered to look into. Yeah, he's got some vaguely right-wing point of view. I don't remember the details of it. Don't care. The other thing that people say is, oh, Jordan Peterson word salad. You know, as I pointed out, if your critique of somebody is that they're word salad, you should honestly, before you open your mouth and make that critique, you should make sure that you aren't just being a dumbass, because most of the time that critique is lobbied against somebody, the person lobbying the critique is totally ignorant and totally stupid. The ideas that they're saying are word salad are totally cogent and understandable. You just aren't really trying. So, before you say, oh, that's word salad, you should check with your smarter friends. Is this word salad? And they'll probably tell you, no, actually, that makes a lot of sense. Oh, never mind. Never mind. I was going to say it was word salad, but it's not. So you should do that if you're going to lobby that critique against Jordan Peterson, because it's usually not true. The other critique that he gets is that he never actually owns whether he believes in God. So you say, do you believe in God? Well, it depends on what you mean by God. That's a little bit more fair of a criticism. But I don't think that his agenda isn't necessarily, let me do a proof of God. So what he actually believes about whether God exists or does not exist isn't really relevant to the stuff he's pushing out there. What is relevant is what Paul was kind of tweeting about, the secular utility of religion and metaphorical truths. Now, usually when you start talking about this stuff, you are going to get a good chunk of atheists and secular people who will take your side. Why? Because they've done the research. They've watched some of the videos. They've checked out some of Jordan Peterson's lectures. They know some of the other players who are making some of the same points, and they're actually studied up, and they're like, yeah, you're right. This is totally true. So I had a couple of atheists, couple of secular people who were helping me, who get it, basically. And if you're a secular atheist person, you don't get it, it's not that complicated. A metaphorical truth, as famously declared by Brett Weinstein, he calls it a useful fiction. And you can see how that could be applied to a religious thing. What I was trying to point out, and what I will continue to point out, and this is inarguably true, there is secular utility to religion. There is a point to religious traditions, religious values, building of churches, painting of paintings, and there are social benefits to be derived from the practice of religion that are totally irrelevant to whether the ontology that they are saying is true. Now, this is inarguable. People go and build a church in the name of Jesus Christ, or they go and build better point, they go and build an orphanage. They go and build a hospital in the name of Christianity. They are doing something that is of benefit to the society at large. And they are doing it under the banner of Christianity. Whether in fact there is a Jesus Christ, only Son of God, hallelujah to the Lamb of God, who actually exists inspiring the behavior is totally irrelevant. Why? Because the behavior itself is positive and beneficial to the culture at large and to the society. One of the most obvious examples is cathedrals. Cathedrals are the biggest tourist attraction in Europe. They would not have been built without Christianity. Most of the paintings, once you get up to I think till you get to about the late 1900s. No, not 19. Did I say 19? I meant 1800s. So you get to about 1860. There was realism, French realism. There were other schools that didn't have anything to do with religion. But once you get to about the late 1860s with what are they calling themselves? The Renoirs and the Monets. What's the name of those guys? The Impressionists and the Post-Impressionists and the more modern schools of art. Prior to that, gotta go back 100 to the end of the Renaissance. But prior to that, huge chunks of the paintings were inspired by religion. Huge chunks of the cathedrals, the architecture, the art, the music, inspired directly by religion. Now, that's just one example of the enormous social benefits of religion. That's not even taking into account the social cohesion provided by religion. That's just one example. To argue against the secular utility of religion is basically arguing, it's basically a totally fallacious point. And what I was trying to point out, and what most secular people can easily understand, it's irrelevant to the ontology. You paint a beautiful painting on the Sistine Chapel. Does it really matter if Jesus is actually the Son of God? No. The painting is still a beautiful painting. It was inspired by a religion directly. You build a church or an orphanages or a hospital, inspired directly by what the Bible says. Does it matter if Jesus is the only Son of God? No, of course not. It doesn't. There is tons of secular utility to the practice of religion. Tons of it. That is, if you do not believe in God, that is a perfectly good explanation for why religion was as powerfully important and as popular as it in fact is. It's actually better evidence for the secular utility of religion. So you can't really argue with the clear conscience that something's got to be, the ontology of what Christians say is true has got to be true in order for secular religion for have secular utility. Totally fallacious point. You can't argue that with the clear conscience. Why? Because it's so obviously false. So obviously false. Especially if you don't believe in God. Then you've got to explain all this productive behavior of the Christians. You know, I can explain it easily with believing in God. God inspired them directly to do it. There you go. If you don't, well, I don't believe in God. Okay, then you explain it. Well, there's tons of secular utility religion. It's the only other explanation. It's the only other explanation. Religion in general, Christianity in particular, is a civilizing influence in the world that you live in. You know, one of the things that Matt Dillahunty was arguing on Atheist Experience recently on this very topic was, I don't need a book to tell me not to kill. Well, you kind of do. You might not need one now because you were raised in a society heavily influenced by Judeo-Christian ethics, but if you were raised in like 700 AD in Norway and you were a Viking, you know, you would not have you would have needed that book. They would have said, Matt Dillahunty, let's go burn that village down and kill all the men and rape all the women. You would have been like, yeah, I'm in. Why? I'm a Viking. Of course I'm in. That's what we do. You needed some form of something to tell you to do otherwise. Wasn't intrinsic to a human being to know what to do, good, bad, right, wrong. So the idea that religion was a civilizing, all I'm trying to point out with that is religion was a civilizing influence on the culture at large in the world that we inhabit. Period. Full stop. You cannot argue against that. Why? Because it's basically true. It's basically true. If you do not believe in the ontology of Christianity, you cannot take away from Christianity all of the social benefits of it. Now, you can make other points along the anti-theist vein, which I'm somewhat empathetic to. You know, religion produces homophobia. The main ones that these people will bring up, anti-theists. Religion makes people homophobic, it makes you anti-science, and religious people tend to be dogmatic and rigid and ideological. Now, all those three complaints are somewhat valid. I wouldn't say they're intrinsic to religion, but you do tend to find them with religious people debatably more often than not, but I'm not even sure if that's true. Look at what's happening to all the deconverts out there. If you talk about dogmatic and ideological, they're just as dogmatic and ideological as anything they deconverted from, many ways worse. Honestly, they really are. That's one of the things I talk about a lot in my videos. You know, it's not intrinsic to religion, necessarily, people being dogmatic and ideological. Because you deconvert people from the religion, and you got, you know, foaming at the mouth rabid atheists who are just as dogmatic and ideological as any fundamentalist religious person you will ever meet in any context. They're just doing it all in the name of atheism. So what have you gained from that? Probably nothing. Not really anything, actually. Because they ain't going to build orphanages and they ain't going to build hospitals, that's for sure. The only time they ever talk about stuff like that is when they're trying to compare them. Well, we can build hospitals too. We just won't do it, you know. It's even better because we'll build hospitals not inspired by God. Yeah, but, you know, all things being equal, they won't get built. That's the problem. You know, secular humanism isn't going to produce a track record of social benefit, of benevolent social conduct. I mean, it might, but that's not an automatic or a given. That's part of what Peterson is trying to point out. And that's part of what these pro-religious secular people are trying to point out. That is why Brett Weinstein says, quote, you dismantle religion at your peril. At peril to the society that you currently inhabit. Why? Because religion is providing a lot of important things that may actually be totally necessary for the full functioning of your society. And they're things that you value importantly. And if they're not exactly religious ideas, they certainly emerged out of religion and was religion that gave birth to them. And they're usually ideas that the secular humanists and the secular people value very highly. For example, the intrinsic worth of the human being. That's one that Peterson always goes to. The rights, the inbred rights of man. The idea that each of us, irrespective of where we are in life, what position we have inalienable rights. It's not some sort of mysterious coincidence that the founding fathers used inalienable rights and God hand in hand. Because if they are not grounded in God, then they are grounded in man. I mean, that's a no-brainer. We are all endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights. Amongst them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. They are not grounded in God. All that means that you ground them in God is that they cannot be revoked by the next regime change. They cannot be taken away when these particular people come into power. Why? Because they're ingrained. They're God-given. That's another way of saying intrinsic. People back then didn't have secular language. Maybe there's a way that you could ground them in secular language, say they're intrinsic and cannot be revoked. But that's the idea behind God-given rights. That only God himself can take away. They're given to you by virtue of you being alive and being born. So they cannot be revoked by a regime change. If they are man-given rights, theoretically they can be. And that theoretically is very important. So that's just one of the secular utility of religion ideas. That's just one. There's a whole host of them in the society that you currently inhabit. And the society that you currently inhabit grew up and emerged part and parcel with Christianity. For a long time it was known as Christendom. So there are a lot of ideas that are absolutely sacrosanct, totally important to the full functioning, the full flourishing of the society we currently live in. Many of them are religious, or inspired by religion directly, or completely related to religion. That's the point. And that's a truth. And that truth is true irrespective of whether Jesus actually rose from the dead, whether Jesus actually is divine. And furthermore, when you start talking about this stuff, there are plenty of atheists, plenty of secular people who will go, yeah, I totally agree, that's totally true. This is no-brainers. There should not be any anti-theists. There should not be anybody arguing with the point. Why? Because it's pretty obvious. That's why. Because it's pretty obviously so. Now, getting back to, let me see if yeah, I'm a little all over the place, but whatever, it's productive. You're all over the place, Craig. I don't agree. I think I'm being productive. What was astonishing to me was how little people understood the idea of a metaphorical truth. I mean, people who poo-poo the idea don't even understand what it means. Now, some of that is Brett Weinstein's fault. His particular framing of it, I'm not that happy with. He talks about religion as a useful fiction, something that is totally false, but metaphorically true, or has utility because, even though it is totally false. That is not exactly what a metaphorical truth is, or is not the best, most useful framing of the idea. The one that I always bring up is that which hasn't killed me made me stronger. Now, it is not literally true. It is not empirically verifiably true. Matter of fact, if you try to empirically verify the statement, you're going to find that there are times where it just ain't so. Guy got hit by a bus. He's in a wheelchair. Yeah, it didn't kill me, but you ain't any stronger. You're in a wheelchair and you're, whatever. Or you may be on life support. It didn't kill you, but it didn't make you stronger. But it has metaphorical truth, which means in some contexts, though it is not literally true, you can easily understand a context wherein it is referring to some form of deeper truth. You're struggling at work. This is an example I've used before, but people still don't actually understand it. You're struggling at work. You're having a run-in with your boss, and it's this hard struggle. You come home and say, this is really a struggle. My boss is being such a jerk. And your wife, trying to help you out, says, that which doesn't kill you makes you stronger. What's she saying? You're going to grow from this experience. You're going to learn from this. It's going to make you a better person. You're going to learn to humble yourself, be smarter, wiser. That's a metaphorical truth. It's not literally true in all situations, but it also isn't a useful fiction. It's metaphorically true. And like I said, that's a really useful way of parsing out the Bible, because then you stop arguing over the the faith claims of the Bible, and you start actually seeing what the Bible was written for and the messages that it was intended to communicate. So in one of my other videos, I mentioned Jesus washing the disciples' feet. That is a metaphorical truth. It is trying to communicate to you, the reader, the value of humility. Look, humility is so valuable. The King of Kings and Lord of Lords, God himself in the flesh, is now going to bend down and wash the disciples' feet. Why? As an example to you, the reader, the person observing the text. This is how important humility is. This is what you are to embody if you are to truly be Christ's disciple. Now that's pretty straightforward and obvious. That's a metaphorical truth. And why some secular people totally understand this is because you don't have to believe Jesus is God in order to understand what the Bible is trying to teach in that particular instance. At all. So me and a secular person can be talking about the value of humility and what John 13 is trying to tell us about the value of humility. And we can actually see eye to eye and have a real conversation about it. Without them believing for 1 second that Jesus is God. It's pretty straightforward, right? I mean, I don't see what even the issue is. I don't see anything I just said that could even be reasonably objected to. I really don't. And like I said, there are plenty of secular people, there are plenty of atheists, there are a lot. There are a lot, and they're growing. At some point, they're going to outnumber the anti-theists. Why? Because anti-theism, honest to God, an untenable position. All it means is you haven't done the research, really. That's all it means. And if you don't want to hear that, too bad. It's God's honest truth. All it means is you haven't really investigated the subject at all, with any amount of fair-mindedness. Aaron Ra will tell you he's done 20 years of research on religion. Well, he hasn't clicked on page 1. Page 1, because you go to page 1 of a Google search and you write the secular utility of religion, and you will have study after study right in front of your face telling you the secular utility of religion. Studies that they have done. Studies, empirically verified studies on what actually religion helps produce in the people who are religious. In one of the debates, who was it? The guy who was on my channel, Glenn Scrivener. Said if it were a drug, this drug would be touted everywhere. The benefits that are powerful and so obvious, better, longer life, less stress, all this stuff, more meaning in your life, more you could go look at his debate with Matt Dillahunty, study after study after study. So if you're still clinging to this idea of anti-theism, it is because you haven't done the research. You go watch that debate. Get a really good idea. Go watch that debate. Go watch the debate with Inspiring Philosophy versus Matt Dillahunty. That'll tell you everything you know right there. Why? Because they both use almost very similar studies. And the studies are conclusive. So if you do the appropriate research, you will come to the appropriate conclusion. Why? Because the evidence points to the conclusion. Duh. Because it's basically a fact. It's basically a fact. If there is no Jesus, if Jesus wasn't God and he didn't rise from the dead, okay, then you have to account for why Western civilization was so successful. And the obvious answer is because Christianity was part and parcel, it was part of the air everybody breathed. So there's obvious enormous secular utility to religion in general, Christianity in particular. If Jesus is God, then that explains why Western civilization dominated. But if Jesus isn't God, then the secular utility explains it. But the only point that I was making in all of that, and the only point of taking metaphorical truths, talking about in terms of metaphorically truths, then we don't have to disagree. I don't have to prove to you that Jesus is God in order for all of us to understand that there's secular utility of religion. There's value in teaching somebody to humble themselves and wash the feet. Wash the feet of the disciples. There's secular value to that. Some of the things that Christianity teaches and tells you, the practicing Christian, this is how you are to live in this world, are inarguably true, inarguably good values, inarguably the right things to do. Love your neighbor as yourself. Who's going to argue with that? Probably not even Matt Dillahunty. Matt Dillahunty, is that a good idea? Yeah, it's a pretty good idea. Why don't you Christians try it? That's probably what he said. The problem is you Christians aren't doing it. All right, I agree with you. That is the problem. When Paul says, imitate me as I imitate Christ, he's saying, basically, put on the righteousness of Christ. Become more merciful. Humble yourself and become more merciful, compassionate, loving, kind person to the point of self-sacrifice. Now, if every single solitary Christian did that, the church would actually be on fire and alive. And people would stop saying, wow, these Christians are idiots. And they go, wow, these Christians are heroes. These Christians are wonderful. And if everybody else started adopting that as a way of life, this world would become a much better place. That's it. That's the truth. That's the God's honest truth. If everyone were adopting the core message of Christianity, which is to become more Christ-like, humble yourself, serve your fellow man to the point of self-sacrifice, be loving, kind, and compassionate to the point of self-sacrifice, this would be a better world. Period. I don't see how you could argue against that. I mean, you could try, but I don't see how you could do it with a clear conscience. Pretty sure Aaron Ra might even agree with that. Once you stop throwing at the mouth, once you calm down a little, breathe, Aaron, breathe. Okay, when you do think it's a better world if everybody loved their neighbors themselves, and then you go, yeah, but Christians don't do that. They're too busy protesting movies and Okay, but breathe deeply. You do think it'd be a better world if everybody did do that. I didn't say Christians are doing it, but if they did do it, it'd be a better world. He'd probably go, yeah, it would be. I don't see how you could argue against that. Even Aaron Ra. So, anyways, yeah, long and rambling, but I think I addressed some core key topics, so, I like what I had to say. So, there you have it, kids. That is all for now. Just another tirade, this time on metaphorical truths, secular utility of religion, and Christ-like behavior. That is all for now. The Mass is ended. Go in peace. Amen.